All right, so last weekend, X-Men Dark Phoenix, or well, really just Dark Phoenix, came out and it ended a 19-year franchise. And the general ongoing joke is not with a bang, but with a huge ass whimper. I saw the movie, I enjoyed it for what it was, probably a lot more than I should have, but I'm okay with that. However, it was a doomed production from the start. It never quite got the chance to get to where it needed to go. That's not to say that there weren't follies by the director and the producers and everything else in the process, but I mean just the general world of which this movie found itself in was vastly different from when it began to where it ended up. And Kinberg here actually opens up a little bit about what went wrong, and it's pretty interesting. So it says here that Dark Phoenix had a brutal opening weekend. That would be the blockbuster culmination of Fox's decades-long X-Men franchise fizzled out with just 32.8 million, an all-time low for the franchise. Despite a star-studded cast and one of the most recognizable titles in the X-Men legacy, on the heels of the disappointing debut, writer-director Kinberg gave a candid, classy interview with the Business Podcast, diving into how release date shuffles and the Disney-Fox merger impacted the film's journey and why he's not using any of it as an excuse. Here's the thing with that. For one, Kinberg, in this particular regard, class act for not putting the blame on Disney. At the same time, he could totally have put the blame on Disney. But this dude wants to work again with Disney, preferably probably with Marvel under Kevin Feige, even though that's never going to happen. And he wants to make sure that he doesn't piss on them on his way out the door. He wants to get more work, but it's good to get an idea for how this whole thing went down. Now, he says here, it's clearly a movie that didn't connect with the audiences that didn't see it. It clearly didn't connect enough with audiences that did see it. So that's on me. But it's not to say that there weren't struggles along the way. First and foremost, the filmmaker highlighted Dark Phoenix's fat path to a summer release date he never planned for. A release date that also left him in the wake of Avengers Endgame, a phenomenal success. And that is true. And no one really talks about that. I think I mentioned it before, but it's like, again, you had X-Men Dark Phoenix coming out less than 2 months or a little over 2 months after the release. No, not even less than 2 months, month and a half or whatever after the release of the biggest movie of the year, the biggest movie of the decade, the potentially the biggest movie of all time. If they can pull in an extra 60 million, I think they need. I mean, this movie was going to get hit. Never mind, the merger was already a known property. People already knew that the X-Men was done for. I mean, like I said, everything was stacked against Dark Phoenix, so much so that it just ultimately crumbled under its own weight. Now, he says, I've always felt that we had a tough date for this particular movie. It wasn't made as a classic superhero movie. It was made as a more of a dramatic, intimate, smaller film. Originally, it was going to come out in November. Then it was going to come out in February. And those were the dates I felt actually would have been more appropriate, which, again, is absolutely true. The big problem, though, is that February and November had this last November would have been good. It would have come out a month after Venom. And I think coming out right after Venom, even though Venom made a lot of money, I think people would have been far more forgiving to Dark Phoenix had it come out at its original release date. But a big amount of that problem was the fact that they had reshoots at the tail end, or in the tail end of the summer from last year. They did a couple test screenings that ultimately crashed and burned, and they were really trying to get this movie right. So much so that they even went and remade the whole ending of the movie as to not overlap with the Skrulls from Captain Marvel. I mean, this movie, I feel, did everything it could to not fall into the trappings of just being a copycat. And again, Kinberg is such a team player, even now in this interview, that I feel that he is just kind of giving them an out. I think the dude is like taking the brunt of it, which is what he should do. Take the responsibility. Obviously, he's the writer, producer, director, so it all falls on his shoulders 100%. But I still look at this like the underdog story, and we always intrinsically root for the underdog. That's just how I view it, I guess. Now, he goes on to say here, he goes, also, I think coming out 5-6 weeks after what may be the biggest movie or the second biggest movie in the history of cinema, that also happens to be in the genre of superheroes, was tough for us. I always anticipated that it was going to be tough to be in the tailwinds of that movie, but I wouldn't blame it on the weekend. No, I would. That was a big part of it. Even Men in Black International and Shaft came out this week, and it's another low weekend. Secret Life of Pets came out last weekend alongside this movie and did better, but still, that was half of what the previous film made. It's in this slump, and that's what I talk about when there's only a finite amount of money going into the box office season, the summer box office. This is that situation. So yes, it is in part the weekend. They should have delayed this movie, not to summer, but to November, right? They should have absolutely positively pushed it back towards the end of the year, put it out in October or November, right around that time, and it would have done far better. It would have done far better. Endgame was still too fresh in people's minds, and this movie didn't live up to that expectation, and I think that's ultimately true. Now, he did dodge questions about whether it's true that James Cameron asked for Dark Phoenix to be moved so that Alita Battle Angel could come out in February. And I think that actually worked out better for Alita Battle Angel. That movie did go on to gross $400 million and ultimately just squeak by into what is essentially the profitability era. But he says here it's hard to know. If you had accelerated certain things in that movie, perhaps it would have been ready by that date, explaining that the reshoots of Dark Phoenix weren't as intensive as some previous X-Men films, but ultimately they didn't have a choice. They didn't have a choice because this was all Disney at this point in time. And Disney was not going to let this movie be a success. Look, you can look at the movie if you've seen it and you can go, Matt, that was a bad movie. That was a terrible movie. I didn't like it at all. And that's fine. That's your opinion. And you have every right to be wrong. That's okay. What I'm trying to say here, though, is in context, this movie being any bit of a success would be detrimental for Disney. If this movie would have pulled in Days of Future Past numbers, or even just opening weekend of X-Men Apocalypse numbers, it would have set the tone differently. Because the way that the studios work is they would have had to have then waited longer to bring in the X-Men, to retool the X-Men for this. If this movie would have been a success, if it would have grossed $500 million or whatever, it would then look too good to then maybe potentially reboot it faster. And a lot of people like myself have come out and said perhaps this movie shouldn't have come out at all, as to then just reboot the X-Men faster and not deal with this movie. The movie tanking the way that it did, getting all the negative press the way that it did, everyone talking about how bad it is and that it's a crash and burn movie, all that's doing is benefiting Disney. And I don't think that's right or fair. The movie is nowhere near as bad as the critics made it out to be. The movie is actually a fair amount of fun. And I think people are coming off of Endgame, and I think that's what they're looking at. And I'm not criticizing those people for having their opinion on it. It's a reality of the situation. But the powers that be, the House of Mouse, did work against this movie. They did. They absolutely worked against this movie because it messes with their bottom line. And when they want to make sure that Kevin Feige has whatever toy he wants and whatever capacity he wants because of how much money he has made them, they're going to do everything they can to tank this movie. And they did. They succeeded. It's a cost of doing business. That's what I'm trying to get to here. It's the cost of doing business. Nothing more, nothing less. It's not an ideological grudge against Kinberg. It's nothing like that. It's simply the cost of doing business. This movie would have been detrimental for Disney and Marvel Studios had it been a success. The fact that it's a failure only means we're going to see a retooled X-Men inside the MCU a lot sooner. And at the end of the day, we all win. But I still think this movie deserves a bit more credit than it's getting. And I do give props to Kinberg for owning up to it and for explaining it and for being a team player. I hope Feige can find some place for him, or Alan Horn and whoever's running Fox right now, toss the guy another movie, give him another shot. You know, he's like, oh, you did good. You took the blame for this one. So we're going to give you something else that you like. And those are my thoughts on it. I'm curious to know what you think. Let me know down in the comments below. I will talk to you guys later. Have yourself a great day. If you made it this far, type in Dark Phoenix in the chat so I know. Be sure to like the video. Tell me your thoughts and how you feel. And have a good one, guys. And peace out.